Hello! Welcome to my Grousing Gazer YouTube channel. My name is Klaus, and yes, I am the Grousing Gazer. I'll be your host and narrator for this video. Today, we're going to review Charles James Hall's book titled Millennial Hospitality, which is an autobiography of his life. But first, let's review Charles' past to establish his credibility.
July 20th, 1964, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, and I did 13 weeks of basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. The military gives you a large number of tests to see what you might be good at. I got a perfect score in that, better than the test I'd ever seen. And I got the Air Force record for math ability. I got one wrong out of 500. And so they were very impressed with me. And when they came around with the wish list, as I was graduating, high best grades of anybody in my class, and they said, where do you want to get sent? And I put in maybe Germany or England. And the sergeant said, no, I understand you're getting sent to Nellis. They want you there. And so when my orders came through, it was for Nellis Air Base here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was given the choice of going to re-enlisting and becoming an officer and being this weather observer, the duty weather observer for my entire career out in the ranges. Or if I elected to go to Vietnam, they would send me to Cam Ranh Bay, which was one of the nicest places to get sent to because you weren't really under fire or anything. And then when I got back, I would only have 2.5 months left in my enlistment, so I would be discharged and I could go home. And since I was quite homesick at the time, I decided to take Vietnam. I was expecting to get sent to Cam Ranh Bay and to have a pretty easy rest tour after all the stuff I'd been through out in the ranges. Well, when I got to Vietnam, you always have to check into the country at Tan Son Nhut out north, next to Saigon. And the night before I got there, the communists had attacked the air base at Ben Thuy in the Delta, a South Vietnamese air base with some Americans there. It's on the Mekong River, just a few miles upstream from Can Tho, South Vietnam's second largest city. And one of the American observers had been killed, and some other Americans had been killed. And I got there, and the sergeant looked at my orders, and he said to me, well, I showed him my orders. I'm going to Cam Ranh Bay, And he said to me, well, you look to me, Airman Hall, like a man that knows how to take care of himself when things get pretty rough. And I said, yeah. And he said, so he tore up my orders and said, I'm sending you to Ben Thuy in the Delta. And I said, wait, there's a whole busload of them. I'll go get a couple. There's men that can do it better than me, right? He typed up my orders, and I said, you're going to Ben Thuy. And I was on the next plane to Ben Thuy.
Because of his service in Vietnam, Charles Hall was awarded the Bronze Star, as well as 2 medals from the Republic of Vietnam, the Campaign Medal and the Gallantry Cross with Palm. It sounds like he was awarded with some very prestigious medals for service that he wouldn't want tarnished with lies in his books. Some debunkers feel that Millennial Hospitality makes Charles Hall out to be a superhero. Well, I think the medals that he has earned in Vietnam makes him a superhero. Perhaps the awards show that Hall is able to think outside the box in a crisis. He effectively analyzes the situation, comes up with a solution, and calmly implements it without delay. Some debunkers may complain that Hall's books were written to entertain people, which they feel explains his sudden entry into the UFO community. Although his books are entertaining, that doesn't mean that they are fiction. It means he's a good writer. Regarding Hall's sudden entry into the UFO community due to his books, Charlie's wife can explain it best.
And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm working on a book for the past 18 years without telling me about it." And I said, "Really?" And I read for about 20 minutes, and I came back and I said, "We have to publish this." Well, first of all, he had to swear to me that it was true. And he said, "Oh, no, I'm just writing my memoirs for our grandchildren." And it actually got to be a pretty heated argument. And finally I said, "Charles, you're unemployed. If the men in black come to the front door, you go with them. It's free room and board." And then he laughed and he said, "You're right. What do we have to lose?"
Well, that was revealing. Anyone who wants sudden notoriety doesn't take 18 years to write a book, and neither Charles nor his wife, MT, wanted fame. She just wanted his memoirs published to pay the bills, since Charles was unemployed at the time. Charles just wanted to write his memoirs for his grandchildren. With that said, maybe, just maybe, he could have added a little extra drama for his grandchildren. But that doesn't mean he fabricated the events nor the characters in the book. Look at his body language, his personality, the words he uses. Charles did not make this up. He is sharing his adventures on the range with his grandchildren and us. Please share any comments you may have. Now, let's get into his adventures with the tall whites. The Air Force trained Charles Hall to be a weather observer. Soon after Charlie arrives at Desert Center, he is given the challenge to solve the mystery of Range 4 Harry at Mojave Wells. Apparently, Harry likes it hot. He hides in the mountains during the winter and runs around the dry lake beds at Range 4 during the warm summer evenings. Some believe Harry is a horse that got too close to an atomic blast because one side of him glows a soft fluorescent white. Apparently his face is human-like with large blue eyes, and his tail is made of long blonde hair. All the weather observers that go to Range 4 Weather Shack return terrified. They wouldn't report the weather even in teams of 2. They insisted that Range 4 Harry made it too dangerous. Range 4 Harry also has, quote, a real smooth gait because it looks like he was drifting or floating, and has nearly perfect hearing, end quote, because he hears conversations from a quarter-mile away. Upon further investigation, Charlie learns that Range 4 Harry, quote, has nearly transparent white blonde hair and stands about 6 feet tall, end quote. Some of the personnel thought that Harry was a hallucination that responds to your questions and knows his name. Others think that Harry is a, quote, old prospector and his burro that people see hiking around the ranges at night, end quote. Charles found everyone's explanation of Range 4 Harry quite amusing. He laughed for days. Another recollection of Range 4 Harry was that he was a coyote. Quote, it had light-colored or blonde hair. It looked almost like an albino. Maybe it got exposed to some atomic radiation or something because it was so thin, end quote. Time moves on, and Hall continues performing his balloon tests to determine the wind speed. And one day, 2 white patches caught his eye. Apparently they, quote, drifted 20 miles in 30 minutes in a wind speed at 5 miles an hour, end quote. Charles had 45 minutes to spare, so he got in his truck and chased after it until his stomach growled due to hunger. He was, quote, so convinced that it must be paper or plastic, end quote. On the way to the chow hall, he wondered, quote, "Is that what everyone calls a range 4 Harry? First, I heard it was a radioactive horse, then a prospector and a burro, and now I see parachutes and plastic. I wonder what he really is," end quote. Matt, a worker in the mess hall, confessed that he and the range rats went up into the mountains to spy on the tall whites' base camp. They saw, quote, "a flying saucer parked on the ground, its door open. It was at least as big as the Range 3 lounge building. It was chalk white and ellipsoidal. Outside there were 3 white people. They were all chalk white, taller than you are, and they looked almost human. They had strung hammocks between some trees. They were all sleeping the way people do on a picnic. They're a lot thinner than you and I are. They are so white and thin that at first I thought I was looking at some humans who were sick, or maybe suffering from some kind of wasting disease," end quote. Charles asked, quote, "You had your binoculars with you. If the door was open, what did you see when you looked inside?" end quote. Matt responded, quote, "Hieroglyphs, just like Egyptian hieroglyphs. Just inside the door was this panel of switches or buttons. On each switch or button was a different hieroglyph," end quote. Charles asked if Matt could remember what the hieroglyphs looked like, and Matt proceeded to draw 3 of them, which matched the 3 hieroglyphs drawn by Wayne, a range rat.
It was a very idyllic, beautiful day, and I was listening to what sounded like western meadowlarks singing in chorus way down the valley. But I had actually never seen a western meadowlark bird anywhere out in the ranges, but I would keep hearing the sounds all the time. And I was looking at the purple sagebrush and stuff. I thought I saw this, what looked to be a little white girl, run past one of the openings. It looked like the sagebrush in the background, only much, much thicker and much taller. And there were lanes through the sagebrush, but generally speaking, the sagebrush was more of a maze, you know. And after a little while, I got a clear glimpse at what I was certain was a little lost girl with chalk white skin running out there. So I put on my gloves and I got my 2 canteens of water and put on my, and of course I always had combat boots and stuff. And I walked out to see if I could get a closer look. Is anyone out there? Are you a little lost girl? You know, and then every now and then I would get a glimpse of her. I could just tromp down the sagebrush and make, you know, broad lanes for me to go through. And as soon as I started doing it, I noticed that all the meadowlark sounds that I'd heard coming from down the valley suddenly moved up the valley quickly. It just seemed like there was a flock of birds around, you know, and you could hear one off to the sagebrush on my right and one off to my left, none actually behind me, but then like an arc around me. And of course, it made me a little nervous, but I was determined to make sure, because I would every now and then would get glimpses of the little girl. And one of them put out a real shrill sound. It was off to my right. And the little girl stopped running and just stood there in the lane out there some distance away from me with sagebrush in between me and her, and waited for me to break through to where she was. And so in a very patient and deliberate fashion, I broke down the sagebrush, made a real nice wide trail and broke it off until I could get to the lane where she was and in effect have her trapped in a box canyon in the sagebrush, no more than from here to say where the camera is. Don't be afraid, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm the weatherman over there. I just thought you might need to be with your parents. And I turned around and I looked at her and I saw that she was a little girl, but she wasn't a human little girl, okay? And the shock I felt can hardly be described. I heard all these sounds. I kind of turned around and put my back to her so that I could control my own fear. And I kind of started staggering back to my weather shack, and I had to go down through the lanes I had cut. And I was just saying, I'm the weatherman. I'm over here in the weather shack. If you need some water, I have it. If you're lost, just come to where I am and I'll call the base commander and stuff. I was coming down the last big wide trail with sagebrush on both sides, and I wondered if she was following behind me. And I stopped and turned around slowly, and a sight I'll always remember, running straight towards me, not as far away as the car, 50 feet, maybe less, was one of the tall white men, Range 4 Harry. He was running down the trail straight towards me, and I stood there like a deer in the headlights. He could have run right over me. I was in such shock. And he got to a cross lane that I had cut, and then he turned quickly into the cross lane and ducked down behind the sagebrush, and then would peek at me over the sagebrush. And I was in such shock, I was kind of staggering. And all I could think was, just keep walking. What you don't know about won't hurt you, And I just kind of staggered back into my weather shack at Range 1, and I closed the door, and I just sat there for like a half hour.
Charles gives a much more detailed description of the little girl in his book. Quote, her skin was chalk white. She wore a chalk white jumpsuit with a solid white astronaut-like boots. The suit appeared to be constructed from an aluminized canvas-like material. Her boots appeared to have been made from a molded nylon-like material. She had short blonde hair and light blue, intelligent-looking eyes. She was much thinner than any little girl I had previously seen. Her eyes were much larger than those of any other little girl I've seen. Her intelligent-looking eyes molded smoothly around the side of her head, noticeably farther than those of any human. Her gloved hands contained only 4 fingers, ending in sharp claws instead of fingernails, end quote. What I find very intriguing was not the discovery of the tall white child, nor the fact that the tall white adult and child helped themselves to a jug of water that was left on the post by Charles Hall, but rather the fact that the base commander, a 2-star general, knew what had happened and left a message at the desert center thanking Charles profusely for what he has done. You see, Charles was alone at the weather shack. The only people that knew what had happened were the tall whites and Charles Hall. Do the tall whites have a telephone in their spacecraft? Do they know the phone numbers of the American generals? Or did the tall whites communicate with the general telepathically? We discovered that the Nordics and reptilians have telepathic capabilities. Why not the tall whites? Let's go back to that drink of water. Charles knew it was the tall whites because A, they were the only ones in the desert other than himself, and B, he found 2 sets of footprints. One being a smaller set, perhaps the lost little girl weighing about 30 pounds, and a larger set, the adult, weighing approximately 110 pounds. This was too much for Charles. Terror and fear built up inside, especially after catching a glimpse of something tall and white standing only 100 feet away from him. He was in near panic when he hit the gas to get back to the base. He got a feel that it might be a young woman standing out in the sagebrush. She might want to thank him for saving her daughter, who had actually been lost. This was too much for Charles. He stopped the truck, opened the door, fell out of the truck, and spilled his guts all over the gravel road. He was sick from the terror. Eventually, Charles was able to climb back into the truck and drive to the chow hall. His friend Smokey, the head cook, was able to see the terror on Charles' face and calm him down. Strange, the desert-based commander got word somehow that Charles was vomiting out on Range 1 Road and phoned Smokey to get a breakfast together and deliver it to him.
It took me almost 6 months, I estimate, to overcome the fear I felt when they came. At first, when things like that would happen, I thought it was me dreaming or me having some kind of brain problem. But as days went on, I decided that because they seemed as human as I was, as real as I was, they seemed to have the same emotions and everything, that to control my fear sent that I should start talking to them. One of the first attempts was I was out at Range 3 one morning and I was tracking the balloon through my theodolite and I felt totally alone. I'd taken the reading and as I was turning to the left to write on my form my reading measurements, this tall white lady in a suit, not touching me, but virtually leaned over my shoulder to look through the theodolite to see what I was looking at with a pleasant smile on her face. Now, I'm right here. I think I'm alone. I've had no warning. I haven't heard anything. And when I turned, and she's right there, you know? Well, I didn't jump in fear because I had long since come to believe that for some reason my mind didn't work the way I expected it to when I was out there. My emotion was, darn, and my mind's acting up on me again. So I finished what I was doing, and then I turned around. She had stood off a ways, maybe as far away as this camera, and was just looking at me smiling. She seemed to be having the time of her life, you know. Her skin was as white as a piece of paper. She had about half as much hair as a human lady would have, and it was platinum white and very short. Her lips and her nose, they were smaller than what you'd think. Her ears were smaller than what you'd think. She otherwise could easily just dress up and look like a human nurse, and you wouldn't have noticed the difference, say like midnight in Las Vegas where everybody looks a little weird, you know. She could have just walked in among us. And she had on a slight helmet, and she had on a suit, and it's just that because she was floating, the suit gave her the power to levitate. I thought it was me. I thought my brain was malfunctioning or something, you know. And so to control my fears, I just smiled and said, oh, I hope, you know, did you want to look some more? You know, it's okay, I'll stand back and let you do that. I thought I was just speaking to maybe a hallucination or a brain, you know, to try to control my fear, you know, because when you're alone out in the desert, even if you're afraid of a rabbit, if you panic, nothing nice is going to happen. You're going to kill yourself running away from a rabbit or something, right?
Due to the length of the video, I still want to mention one last event that happened to Charles. The news of Charles' dedication and his commitment to his job as a weather observer, the ability to think through stressful situations, and consideration for the tall whites, and, most importantly, saving the teacher's daughter, made it all the way up to the Pentagon. According to Master Sergeant Walters, quote, "You sure are the bravest soldier either the general, the major, or myself has ever seen," end quote. The general issued orders that Charles can have use of any vehicle in the motor pool at any time and for any length of time. He also gave orders to the air police to allow Charles access to the Airmen's Club. Then he ordered all rangers closed and canceled all the balloon runs for that day. He wanted Charlie to get proper medical attention for the scrapes, bruises, and blisters that Charlie received after a fall while coming out of the generator shack. The hospital and a helicopter was on standby if needed. The general in charge of the Desert Center knows that Charlie has free run of the ranges and has no authority to restrict them, but asks Charlie not to chase ghosts or white butterflies. While Charles gets all this information by phone, he happens to be in the middle of unloading 12 helium cylinders from his truck at the Range 3 weather shack. Too exhausted to move cylinder 11, Charlie noticed that he was being surrounded by numerous tall whites. He explained to the teacher that he was so exhausted he had to walk by her along the fence for support to get to the Range 3 lounge to call for assistance and rest on the sofa. Then, from behind the lounge building, appeared Range 4 Harry and an American Air Force colonel. Well, Charlie finally made it to the lounge to rest, and he saw the colonel talk to the teacher. As the teacher entered the lounge, Charlie said pleasantly, quote, "You sure have been helpful for a hallucination," end quote. The teacher startled him with her reply, quote, "Remember, Charlie, next time you have to help us for free. You and the men of your family promised," end quote. The tall whites left the area. Charlie took his balloon measurements and phoned in his weather report to the Desert Center. Thinking he still had to offload cylinders 11 and 12, Charlie returned back to the truck. To his surprise, he found that the remaining cylinders had been offloaded and placed beside the other tanks. The days passed until one warm Monday morning when the Range 3 lounge phone rang. Stephen, one of the range rats, answered it and announced, quote, "Condition yellow, somebody wants to play with Charlie. We have 10 minutes to be in the trucks and heading out of here. Shut everything down and head into base. The ranges are closed for the rest of the week. We're closing the place down," end quote. Charlie wondered if the pullout orders applied to him. Steve laughed and responded, quote, "No, of course not, Charlie. Whoever is coming out here to play wants to play with you," end quote. The next night, the young woman, the teacher, and their little girl, her daughter, appeared. They were wearing their white aluminum canvas-like suits. Two items that haven't been mentioned yet are: one, the suits emit a soft white fluorescent light, and two, their suits contain electronics which allows them to float about a foot off the ground. The teacher was smiling while making small talk and thanking Charles telepathically, which put him at ease. Now his heart was racing and his temples throbbing again. How can his hallucinations remember what he did and be thanking him? He had to stop making up excuses and accept that the tall whites were real. But no. Charlie was polite when speaking to them, and they were very accommodating with his requests. So Charlie lost his fear of them, but he still considered them as apparitions, until over breakfast one morning, Charlie told Steve and some of the other range rats, Wayne and Doug, about the chalk-white woman that he had been seeing. Steve told Charlie that he too had seen the two sets of footprints around the post that had the water jug. How can other people have the same hallucinations? Charlie wondered. Quote, "The whole conversation made me nervous. Once again, I became afraid they didn't understand. How difficult my duties were, how difficult it was to get up every weekday morning, alone in the darkness at 3 a.m., driving some 22 miles completely alone out in the nighttime desert. How easily a man's fears could get the best of him, even in the nighttime, as he tried to perform even a simple task like reading a thermometer. Once he became certain that some 8th grade girl was playing games behind him, a girl with 2-inch claws that could come up behind him and so fast that she could kill him with impunity anytime she felt like it. I wanted to make them understand that it mattered not whether the girl was real or only a figment of my imagination. If I panicked, I would be dead either way." End quote. Smokey, the mess hall cook, convinced the general that he should be allowed to stay behind with Charles, so that Charles, the Pentagon generals, and their white wolf friends could be fed hot coffee, fried eggs, and hamburgers just the way they like them, instead of the planned K-rations. Well, inspection morning arrived, and it was another clear, hot, beautiful day out in the desert. Everyone had been evacuated as per plan, and Charles and Smokey laughed till their sides hurt during breakfast. With breakfast complete, Charles headed out to do his 8 a.m. balloon run and noticed 2 people within the inspection team with an unusual appearance. They had unusually white skin, and they were inspecting the motor pool. The balloon run was uneventful, and Charles returned to the mess hall for his lunch. Smokey had a table set with food for him in the front of the mess hall, while the back portion was closed off with a curtain. Only after Smokey and Charles sat down at their table with their backs to the curtain was the curtain opened. They laughed so hard while eating their lunch, they didn't even think of looking over their shoulder to see who was watching them. When they finished their meal, the curtain was closed, and Charles laughed his way out of the mess hall to complete the last wind measurement of the day. With the wind measurements completed, Hall phoned them in to the desert center. Dwight answered the call and sounded anxious and highly agitated. He insisted that the desert base commander and a 2-star general were waiting on the command post hotline, not for readings, but for news on how the inspection was going. Dwight insisted that Charlie re-inspect the Range 3 lounge immediately.
As I was leaving the Range 1, then the teacher and her little girl, they wanted very much to thank me for saving the little girl's life. Well, there's no way in the world that I was in any emotional state to stand anywhere. It was time, that I just needed to keep moving, and I got into my truck and carefully and deliberately just drove out and still didn't wait, you see. So now the teacher and the American generals and the tall white generals, they now had this problem. How do you get Charlie to just sit there and be thanked, right? I'm ordered to take the 12:30 in the afternoon balloon run, and when I finish, to go check the lounge to make sure that all the windows are closed and stuff. And so then when I went into the lounge, which was empty, and I started to come out, I find the tall whites collecting around me, and on the bunker road and on, so that blocking all my escape routes. And an American general and 3-star, a 1-star, a colonel, and what they're going to do is hypnotize me partly. It's an electronic thing, it's with microwaves, and that was one of their weapons, where they could just hypnotize a person electronically. And she and her little girl stood there and very ceremoniously and nicely said, "Thank you, Charlie, for saving my little girl." And the American generals had said, "Well, we've been nice to Charlie. We gave him a tremendous gift, a 3-day pass to Los Angeles," which was quite a bit for a young man. Yes, but this one overcame his fears. This one went back to help her and save her life. It's our way. We have to thank him. And then they, one by one, went back out, and leaving only me and Range 4 Harry there, who, he wasn't afraid of me, and we understood each other. And then at the very end, he had me stand next to the wall and sing one of my songs, and then he unhypnotized me, and he said, "When you're finished the song, then you're on your own." And then he left running. And now, after they all went away, now fear set in. I tried to phone Nellis for help. Well, of course, Range 4 Harry was on the telephones. "I'm in here, I'm trapped," and he was laughing. He was saying, "Charlie, the stories you tell, you have had one great afternoon. Your generals are so proud. Just go to your truck and drive in and have a nice meal."
Remember when Charles laughed so hard coming out of the mess hall at lunchtime that he forgot to look over his shoulder? Well, Smokey was there too, and I wondered if anything happened to him after the laughter subsided. Let's check in with Charles. Charles arrived back at the mess hall at 7:30 p.m. and found Smokey frozen in fear. He was continually rearranging packages of crackers as though hypnotized while humming a little tune. Charlie realized the terror Smokey was in and approached him slowly, spoke to him softly, and placed his hand on Smokey's back. The sun rays fell to such a low angle that it exposed several sets of footprints throughout the mess hall, some adult-sized and some child-sized. Eventually, Smokey opened up to Charles, quote, "They're back there. Don't go back there. You'll scare them like I did. They'll kill me if you scare them. They told me so. The tall one in the corner, he told me so. He said he'd kill me if I ever scared his children again," end quote. Charlie checked the kitchen and found it was deserted. For supper, Charlie and Smokey had a picnic, a sack lunch and coffee. Then Smokey finally broke down crying in agony and in terror. "I was coming for you, Charlie," he cried. "I was coming for you like they ordered." You see, Smokey was waiting up at Willow Flats, where an American sergeant was posted by the American general. Around 4 p.m., Smokey was ordered to go to Charles and get him laughing again, but the cook was ordered not to go into the mess hall. Well, Smokey disobeyed orders because he needed to go fetch the coffee and sandwiches from inside the mess hall. Before he knew what was happening, one of them came up from behind him, and Smokey became hysterical and started screaming. He became totally unglued. He couldn't control anything he was doing. All Smokey could do was obey their orders and stand there. Charles understood and patted Smokey on the back because the same thing happened to him during his White Wolf inspection. True to form, Charles suggested that they cook themselves up a couple of steaks, and Smokey laughed. Finally, he was back to his old self. So what's the grouse? I found 2 items that ruffled my feathers. The first item is the fact that Charles Hall introduces a new species that cannot exist according to the U.S. government, the tall whites. My grouse is not with Charles, but the U.S. government. If the tall whites don't exist, how could Charles and the range rats come up with identical descriptions? By the way, the image you see is the best one I could find that matches the description in Millennial Hospitality. They have chalk white skin, look almost human, except they are thinner, have half the amount of hair on their heads, larger eyes molded smoothly around the sides of their heads, have 4 fingers ending in sharp claws, and can run 40 miles an hour. The tall white's jumpsuit fluoresces and gives them the ability to levitate. The tall white's agenda, in my mind, as expressed in Millennial Hospitality, appears to be nothing more than curiosity for the human species. We are tourist attractions in a tall white galactic vacation. They enjoy our weather, and all the tall whites described in Hall's book were related. For example, the ambassador that was talking to the American general was the teacher's father. The lost little girl, named Playful Butterfly, was the teacher's daughter. Range 4 Harry was the teacher's cousin. Remember, the tall whites are very protective of their children. If you value your life, don't touch them. The second item makes it known that the U.S. government is aware of the tall whites' existence. Charles is quite clear that he sees American generals, colonels, and sergeants with the tall whites. The Pentagon generals are aware of Hall's activities when no one else other than Hall and the tall whites were in the desert. This concludes our video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the gray species and their agenda.
Oh, we're not gonna